You hop in your car every day, right? Seems like a pretty, self-contained thing.
Pretty straightforward, usually.
Yeah. But have you ever really stopped to think about how many different pieces, from how many different places, actually come together to make that car run?
It's kind of mind-boggling when you dig into it.
Totally. And we've all seen the headlines, right? Tariffs, trade disputes, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. It's been hard to miss.
Well, today we're not just glancing at those. We're doing a proper deep dive, looking at a recent article to really try and understand what U.S. tariffs on imported vehicles and auto parts actually mean in the real world.
Exactly. And our goal here isn't just to say, okay, here's the policy. It's to sort of unravel the true impact on the automotive industry, which is incredibly complex, and maybe most importantly on you.
Right. Because that first thought you might have, oh, American cars just got cheaper.
Yeah, that's a massive oversimplification. Just
Yeah.
way more intricate than that because of the whole global system.
Absolutely. And this source material we're looking at, it really peels back those layers. So let's just jump right in. What was the initial step, the thing that kind of kicked all this off?
So the key action we're focusing on is the introduction of tariffs. Specifically, a 25% tariff imposed on imported vehicles coming into the U.S.
Okay, 25%. So the immediate thought, like we said, might be, boom, imported cars, 25% price hike. Simple. But the article makes it really clear that's just not the full picture, is it? Why is that?
Because, crucially, these tariffs don't just hit the finished car rolling off the ship.
Uh-huh.
They also apply to the tens of thousands of individual components that go into making every single car sold in the U.S.
Regardless of the badge on the front.
Regardless of the final assembly point, yeah.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating. Let's take something like the Ford F-150 pickup. You see it, you think, made in the USA.
Quintessentially American.
Exactly. But what's actually going on under the hood, so to speak?
Well, there was this CareSoft analysis, the Wall Street Journal reported on it, and it found that only about 45% of the parts in an F-150 actually come from the U.S.
Only 45%. Wow.
Yeah. Think about it. A single car, it's like a giant global jigsaw puzzle. You're talking around 20,000 parts, often sourced from over 18,000 different companies dotted all over the world.
20,000 parts, 18,000 companies. It's almost hard to wrap your head around.
It really is.
And the article gives some specific examples for the F-150, just to make it a bit more concrete.
It does, yeah. So for the F-150, you've got axles coming across the border from Canada.
Okay.
Rims coming up from Mexico.
Right.
Tires shipped all the way from South Korea.
Okay.
Seats made in Germany. Even things like hoses arriving from Romania.
Yeah.
And that's just scratching the surface.
Hoses from Romania. Okay. So if a tariff hits all those imported bits and pieces, what happens then?
Well, let's think it through. Ford, or any manufacturer using these parts, suddenly has to pay more for them.
Right. Their costs go up, and they're not just going to, eat those costs entirely.
Unlikely. I mean, some might be absorbed, but a big chunk gets passed on.
To us, the buyer.
Precisely. It ultimately lands on you, the consumer. So even though the headline might scream, tariffs on imported cars, the reality is tariffs on imported parts push up the price of pretty much every car sold in the U.S. Doesn't matter it's got a domestic badge or a foreign one.
So it's not just about making imports expensive. It actually makes everything more expensive.
Potentially, yes. Because what we see isn't just American-made anymore. It's more like globally assembled, maybe under an American badge.
Yeah.
And that changes everything when you talk about tariffs.
Okay, so it's not just the price tag on, say, a Toyota or a BMW sold in the U.S. It hits the whole market. And this ripple effect, the article points out, it doesn't even stop at the U.S. border, does it?
No, not at all. This global supply chain is so tangled up that these U.S. tariffs create waves that wash up on shores far away.
How so? Give us an example.
Okay, think about European car makers that have big factories in the U.S. BMW, for instance. They build a lot of their popular X-Series SUVs right here in the States.
Right, in South Carolina.
Exactly. And then many of those are shipped back to Europe to be sold. Same with Mercedes. They make their big EQS SUV exclusively down in Alabama.
Ah, I see. So if you're sitting in Germany buying a fancy German SUV, if it happened to be built in Alabama.
Bingo. You're indirectly paying for those U.S. tariffs because the imported components used to build your car in that Alabama factory cost Mercedes more.
Wow. So the cost increase travels with car.
It can, yeah.
Yeah.
And the article really hammers home just how unbelievably complex and frankly opaque this whole global parts network is.
Yeah.
Trying to trace every single screw and sensor back to its origin. Almost impossible.
And To really drive that point home, the article walks through the journey of just one single component, right? An electrical control unit.
Yeah, it's a great example. Picture this. An Italian company buys an electrical control unit. Okay, sounds simple, but where did it come from?
Okay.
Well, the unit itself was ultimately assembled in the U.S., but wait, it contains a microchip made in Taiwan.
Okay, tariff, #1 maybe, depending on the rules at the time.
Possibly. Then the packaging for that unit,
Right.
made in Mexico.
Right.
Then it gets assembled in the U.S.,
Yeah.
maybe tariff, #2 applies somehow to the value added or other components involved. Then that finished unit gets shipped to Italy.
Okay.
It's installed in a VM motory engine over there. Then that engine gets shipped back across the Atlantic to a Mopar facility in Mexico.
Back to Mexico.
Yep, where it's finally installed into a Jeep.
Yeah.
And then that finished Jeep is sold back in the U.S.
Facing the full 25% vehicle tariff. Tariff #3.
Exactly. It's this insane, multi-stage, cross-continental journey for just one part, potentially racking up costs along the way.
That's genuinely wild. And it highlights the complexity. But the article also mentions the inevitable counterpunch, right? Other countries aren't just sitting back.
Absolutely not. That's a huge piece of this. When the U.S. imposes tariffs like this, affected countries are almost certain to hit back. Retaliation?
Have they?
In some cases, yes, or they've prepared to. Canada, for example, announced its own 25% tariff on cars exported from the U.S.
Okay, direct response.
And the European Union. They put together a pretty hefty list of countermeasures, targeting billions of dollars worth of U.S. goods, including cars and car parts.
So this isn't a one-way street at all. It can quickly spiral into a trade war, essentially.
It certainly risks that kind of escalation, yeah.
And the article zeroes in on the potential impact for Italy's auto industry specifically. Why them?
Well, Italy has a really significant automotive sector. It employs over 250,000 people, and they export a lot to the U.S., about $3.4 billion worth of vehicles annually, plus another $1.3 billion in components.
So U.S. tariffs hit their component exports, and the retaliatory EU tariffs could hit U.S. goods going the other way, potentially hurting everyone.
Precisely. It could really damage their competitiveness, potentially cost jobs in Italy. It's a big deal for them.
Okay, so faced with all this potential chaos and cost, manufacturers were obviously pushing back, lobbying for some relief.
They were, yes. And the Trump administration did offer some, let's call them temporary exemptions, alongside those much higher tariffs, specifically targeting EVs and cars from China.
But these exemptions weren't simple, were they? They had strings attached.
Very intricate strings.
Yeah.
The main one was this. To avoid the 25% tariff, a vehicle needed to have at least 75% of its value originating from within the U.S.-Mexico-Canada region, the USMCA region.
75% regional value content. Okay.
And it got even more complex. There was this 2-year deduction mechanism aiming for 0% tariffs eventually. The target was 85% U.S. content by 2025 for 0 tariffs, and then 90% by 2026.
Wow, those are high bars, 85%, 90%.
Extremely high. So it's not just about where the final screwdriver turns, it's about the value of all the parts and where that value comes from. It adds this whole new layer of calculation and complexity for automakers. Think of it like a really tough sliding scale with future targets.
It sounds like a potential way out, though, maybe down the road. But then the article drops a bombshell using data straight from the car companies themselves. What did that data show?
This is the really striking part. Based on the manufacturer's own filings, their own data submitted to regulators, absolutely none, not one. 0 of the 549 car models currently sold in the U.S. actually meet the criteria to get that 0 tariff rate under the Trump discount.
Wait, 0. Not a single car qualifies now for the 0 rate.
Not according to their own data for meeting those future thresholds. It's a really stark indicator of just how deeply embedded these global supply chains are and how incredibly difficult it is to just, flip a switch with policy and untangle them quickly.
That's astonishing. So these exemptions for now and the near future are basically irrelevant for almost every car you can actually go out and buy.
Pretty much, yeah, in terms of hitting that 0 tariff goal immediately.
And the article gives some examples that really highlight this, right? Cars with surprisingly low North American content, even ones that sound American.
It does. You've got the usual suspects, maybe global brands like Toyota, Volvo, Mercedes, BMW. But there are models with names that you might assume are more domestic, like the Lincoln Nautilus. 87% of its components come from China.
87%?
Yeah.
For a Lincoln?
Yeah. Or the Chevy Trailblazer, 52% Korean components. The Dodge Hornet, 56% Italian.
So even the Detroit brands are deeply global in their sourcing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, which cars get closest to those high thresholds?
Yeah. Who's leading the pack?
Well, the Kia EV6, which is actually assembled in Georgia, has the highest North American content right now at 80%.
Okay. Getting closer.
Then you've got the Honda Ridgeline pickup and the Tesla Model 3 both hitting that 75% mark. But that's about it at the top end. It just shows how integrated everything is, even for cars built right here in North America.
And this ties back to history too, right? The impact of NAFTA and now the USMCA on where the car factories actually ended up being built.
Definitely. After the original NAFTA agreement came into effect, the big Detroit automakers, GM, Ford, Chrysler, and now Stellantis, made very strategic decisions. They shifted a lot of their assembly plants south to Mexico or north to Canada.
Why? Cheaper labor? Easier trade within the bloc?
Primarily, yes. Lower labor costs were a big factor, plus the favorable trade conditions within that North American zone.
And the article has numbers on this for the big three.
It does. Stellantis, for instance, they assemble a huge 56% of the cars they sell in the U.S. market, down in Mexico or up in Canada.
More than half.
Yeah. General Motors, it's a bit lower, around 25% assembled in Mexico, Canada, but they also import another 15% directly from factories in Japan.
Okay. And Ford?
Ford actually assembles the highest proportion of its U.S. market vehicles within the U.S. itself, around 80%.
80% sounds pretty American-made, but as the article keeps stressing, final assembly is only part of the equation.
Exactly. That's the key point.
Yeah.
Where the car is put together doesn't tell you where all the bits came from. And when you look at component sourcing, the picture changes dramatically.
How so? For those same companies?
Right. Even for Ford, with its 80% U.S. assembly, they still source about 60% of their components internationally. Stellantis sources 50% of its parts from abroad. And GM, a hefty 65% of their components are foreign sourced.
65%. So even the most American-assembled cars are still massively reliant on global parts.
Hugely reliant. It really underscores that dependence on this complex, worldwide supply network.
And now that dependence is causing real headaches, right? Disruptions, rising costs. The article even quotes Ford's CEO, Jim Farley.
Yeah, Farley basically said, look, even if we wanted to, we literally cannot get basic things like screws, washers, even carpets made in the U.S. at the scale we need them. The domestic suppliers just aren't there for that volume.
So the idea of quickly reshoring everything is complicated.
Very complicated. It highlights a fundamental challenge in trying to rapidly shift manufacturing back. You need the whole ecosystem, not just the final assembly plant.
And we're seeing actual consequences now, like production lines stopping, layoffs.
We are. Stellantis had to temporarily halt production at some plants in Mexico and Canada because of these tariff-related supply chain issues and because everything is so interconnected.
Knock-on effects.
Exactly. That led to temporary layoffs for American workers at U.S. plants in places like Indiana and Michigan because those plants supply parts to the factories in Canada and Mexico that were shut down.
Wow. So U.S. workers getting laid off because of issues related to tariffs on parts used in Mexico and Canada. It's messy.
It is very messy.
And the article puts some hard numbers on the expected cost increases for the big automakers this year.
Billions, right?
Big numbers, yeah. Ford is bracing for about $2.5 billion in extra costs this year, directly because of these tariffs. GM is looking at an even bigger hit, around $5 billion.
$5 billion in Stellantis. They basically said they can't even give a precise estimate for 2025 yet because there's just too much uncertainty about how these tariffs will actually play out.
So billions and billions in new costs hitting the manufacturers. And while they'll try to, squeeze their suppliers,
Which they will.
the article suggests most of that cost eventually flows downstream.
That's the almost unavoidable outcome.
Mm.
A significant chunk gets passed on to consumers. Us.
Which means higher car prices.
Higher car prices. And this is hitting at a time when prices are already way up. The average price for a new car in the U.S. has jumped massively from around $31,000 back in 2019 to about $48,000 now in 2024.
$48,000, that's a huge increase already.
Huge. Driven by chip shortages, inflation, other factors. But these new tariffs, they're likely to hit the lower end of the market hardest. The article points out that something like 80% of cars under $30,000 are imported.
80% of the affordable cars, so those are the ones likely to see the biggest percentage price jumps?
That's the concern, yeah.
Right.
Making affordable cars less affordable.
And it's not just about price tags. The forecasts for actual sales are being revised downwards, too.
Yes. S&P, the credit rating agency, has significantly cut its forecast for U.S. new car registrations. They're now predicting 700,000 fewer sales in 2025 compared to previous estimates.
700,000 fewer cars sold.
And it gets worse. Down 1.2 million in 2026 and nearly 1,930,000 fewer in 2027. These are big drops.
Wow. So if fewer cars are expected to sell, manufacturers are going to make fewer cars, right, to avoid getting stuck with inventory.
Exactly. They're already adjusting production plans downwards. The projection is that North American factories will build about 1.3 million fewer vehicles this year compared to 2024 levels.
1.3 million fewer vehicles rolling off North American lines. How big a cut is that historically?
Well, S&P puts it in perspective. They note that we haven't seen production cuts of that size since the major pandemic lockdowns back in 2020.
Okay.
And before that, the global financial crisis in 2008.
So we're talking crisis-level production cuts being projected.
It really underscores the potential scale of the impact, yes.
Okay. Higher prices, lower sales, major production cuts. It sounds like a massive disruption. And the original goal, the stated aim of these tariffs, was what? To bring manufacturing back to the U.S.?
That was the core objective, yes. To break up these globalized supply chains and incentivize companies to build more stuff, especially cars and parts, domestically.
So how is the industry responding to that push? Are they building new U.S. factories?
Well, they're expressing a lot of reservations, a lot of concerns. First off, building a new factory takes time. The article mentions 2 to 3 years, and it costs a ton of money. Billions.
Right. Big investments.
And to make those kinds of long-term bets, companies want stability, predictability from the government on trade policy. And many feel that's, well, lacking right now.
The rules might change again.
That's the fear. Plus, they point to other hurdles, shortages of skilled workers here in the U.S., and the fact that even if you build a car part here, you still often need imported raw materials, like aluminum from Canada for rims.
Ah, okay. Or those microchips we talked about.
Exactly. Microchips from Taiwan or South Korea.
Yeah.
Even basic stuff like rubber for tires is often imported. So you can't just isolate the U.S. completely.
And then there's the export question again. Let's say Ford does build more F-150s in the U.S.
Right.
What's the point if Canada slaps a 25% retaliatory tariff on them when Ford tries to sell them up there? Does it make economic sense to boost U.S. production if your export markets start closing off?
That is the absolute core dilemma they're facing. It creates this real catch-22.
So the article concludes that all this uncertainty and instability is leading to, but paralysis.
Pretty much, yeah. A sense of paralysis hanging over the auto industry in both North America and Europe. Everyone's kind of waiting to see how things shake out, hesitant to make big moves.
And who benefits from that hesitation?
Well, the potential beneficiaries could be competitors elsewhere, like in China, where the industry is continuing to push forward aggressively with new models, new technologies, especially in EVs.
While the West is sort of tied up in knots over trade policy.
Yeah, that's the risk, yes.
Okay, so let's try and boil this all down. After this deep dive, what's the main takeaway, the central message about these tariffs?
I think the clearest insight is that putting tariffs on something like cars in today's world is just incredibly complex. It's not a simple lever you pull. The consequences ripple out in ways that are hard to predict and control because everything is so deeply interconnected globally.
Right. It's not just imported cars get more expensive.
No. It disrupts the whole intricate dance from tiny parts sourced overseas to final assembly to the price you pay no matter where you are or what badge is on the car. It affects the entire ecosystem.
It really does give you something to chew on. I mean, think about
Yeah.
the bigger picture here. This whole case study, what does it tell us about globalization versus, trying to protect national economies?
It shows the challenges, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
If something as solid and tangible as a car is actually built through this incredibly complex, interwoven global process, what does that mean for trying to implement protectionist policies in the 21st century? It seems really, really difficult.
It certainly highlights the friction between those two forces.
And it makes you wonder, what other things that we use every day have these hidden, complex global supply chains that we just never even think about? Definitely some food for thought there.